Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Building to a Cybersecurity Framework Bootcamp. I am Lewis Pope. I'm the head security nerd for Enable. So just a quick who am I if you've not had the not been on any of the previous boot camps or office hours that I've been running. I came from the MSP space myself. Started out as just freelance PC repair for many years before I found my way to a break fix shop that I helped mature into an actual MSP. And I've been here at Enable for the last 3 years, almost 4 years now, previously as a sales engineer and now as the head security nerd. My background has largely been security focused for a while now. I'm an SSCP working on my CISSP, so I will try to keep things very, for the most part, oriented on security in the sense of how you actually do it, not the actual, you should do these things, but hopefully more on the how you do these things. And we also have with us today, Stefanie Hammond, who's our head sales and marketing nerd.
Hey everyone, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for taking your time and spending your afternoon or your evening with us. So as Lewis said, my name is Stefanie Hammond. I am the head sales and marketing nerd at Enable. And so Lewis and I are co-presenting this Building to a Cybersecurity Framework together. A little bit about my background. I've been with Enable for almost 17 years. I probably should update that slide. I started back in 2004 when we were Enable kind of the first time around. I've always been on the partner success, partner development, channel, sales side of the house. My last previous position was as principal account manager for all of our elite and super elite partners. And then this position of head sales and marketing nerd was created earlier this year, and I kind of moved into that role. So my contact information is on that slide. You can reach me via email. I'm on LinkedIn, so if you happen to be on LinkedIn, I would love to connect with you. And then I'm also on Twitter. And then, yeah, so we'll glad to be here today.
Thank you, Stefanie. And we'll also have our contact information available elsewhere, so don't worry about getting it jotted down from the current screen. So on to what we're here for today, building to a cybersecurity framework. We're hoping to cover the foundational, technical, and business knowledge needed to take ownership of cybersecurity risk and build highly marketable managed service contracts with a strong cybersecurity control. We want to get you started on the journey in the right direction, on the right foot, so that you can take the next step from where you currently are. So who should be, who is this targeted towards? So who do we want to attend this? Well, we really want MSP business owners, CEOs or presidents, ops managers, technical managers, sales managers, account managers, marketing personnel. They're the ones that are probably going to get the most out of today's session, but really anybody who is an employee of an MSP can get some benefits out of today's session, or anyone interested in, really just interested in sales and is accountable to growing the revenues of your organization. Those are going to be, it's a wide gamut of people, but well, there are benefits for a lot of people in today's session. Setting some expectations on today's session. So this is going to be a 3-hour boot camp with labs and 2 10-minute breaks. We encourage questions during the boot camp. We'll try to answer them as they come in, but we may defer some of them to being answered later in one-on-one communications. We're hoping that this will help get you started on improving your cybersecurity stance at a minimum, but hopefully we're also going to be able to improve your business operations as well. And we'll expect to do some homework. You're not going to be able to walk away from today's session and have everything accounted for that you need to make the next steps. There's going to be additional research, some homework for yourself to figure out, what kind of clients am I targeting? What's their risk levels? A bunch of other things. So this is not going to be a one and done thing. This is going to be something that's going to take a little bit of continual effort on your part. Our core objectives on the technical side is going to be, from me, is going to be making sure that we have good awareness about cybersecurity versus security, framework standards and certifications, being able to discover gaps in your current managed services portfolio, the technical and process benefits that come from building to a framework, how to choose a framework to follow, and how to begin the technical implementation of following a framework.
And then from the business side of things, trying to address a lot of the business challenges that MSPs are facing today with respect to selling security to your customers that we're hoping to address. So as Lewis said, what do we mean when we talk about security? And I'm not necessarily talking about in my particular sessions about how to become or the need to become like an MSSP, but how can you develop a security structure and a framework and then deliver an enhanced suite of security services, really no matter what your MSP size or operational maturity level is. So I'm going to be focusing on, how to package up your different security programs, how to assess a qualified buyer for one of your security offerings, how to position, how to communicate the value of your security packages to your customers and prospects so that you can really work to differentiate yourself and win business from your competitors. All businesses have an MSP currently today that they're using. So we need to work to really make ourselves stand out in order to win new clients. And having a focus on security is going to help you do that. And so that is really what Lewis and I are hoping to cover off in today's session.
Thank you. And so setting some technical expectations, because, well, if you plan for success, it's more achievable. So what is it going to take to implement what you learned today on the technical side? So this is not a 1-week project. The information and the knowledge you gain today, depending on what your current security posture is, it could take you months to implement what you walk away with. Time is going to be needed to research, test processes, learn new tools, and build workflows. Your technical teams and are going to need additional bandwidth to do this. This isn't just a extra thing that can be added to current workloads. You're going to have to allow the bandwidth to be found or to make the bandwidth, whether that's shifting workloads, giving people more time, adding another body, whatever it may be. But they're going to need additional bandwidth to be able to do these things and do them well. All clients going forward, though, once you go through this, should be onboarded with your new security controls that you establish through this once it's established. And then you can convert your existing clients to those new controls as part of an ongoing project. And that's just to kind of set the realistic expectations of what it's going to take on the technical side to implement this. And that homework, remember, it's going to be a big part of this. You're going to have a lot of additional work that you have to do on your own based on some of the guidance that we're setting you up with today.
Perfect. And then from setting the business expectations, as I was saying on this morning's webinar, I don't think anybody's been living underneath a rock the last several years. And our market landscape has changed quite dramatically. And over the last 10 years, MSPs have evolved quite dramatically as well. As a result, we've gone from offering basic break-fix arrangements where the customer calls us, we go out on site, we fix something, and then we bill them afterwards, to moving them over and educating them on, let's get you into a monthly prepaid managed services contract, so that we can provide you better uptime and better reliability and performance stability of your network. But now MSPs need to evolve again, and your programs and your sales messaging need to evolve again, because they need to start addressing the real security threats and the concerns that are out there plaguing many businesses today. And so the message, it's no longer about providing uptime and avoiding downtime. Those benefits are really they're a given now. So MSPs really need to kind of shift their messaging and start focusing on how to best protect and secure their customers, how to keep them safe. That's the new messaging now, because as their MSP, the sad fact is that your customers are already expecting that you're doing this for them and that you already are protecting them. And security discussions, planning, enforcement, or lack thereof, that has become the #1 reason why MSPs are either gaining clients or why they're losing clients. And so as a result, today's new approach to program development and security design, it really does demand that your programs have to have an enhanced cybersecurity focus. and MSPs need to build and start enforcing a minimum viable cybersecurity program standard for all of their customers to standardize on. We used to teach in our old methodologies around the a la carte approach, where you allow a customer to kind of pick and choose what services they want to buy from you because budget is a real concern for them. But that sort of approach is no longer a safe business practice because it puts you as the MSP and your customer at considerable risk. And this isn't revolutionary. MSPs have always included a basic set of security services in their programs. But really, with the emergence of the new threat actors that are out there, especially would have come up over the next couple of years, new security technologies are needed to be introduced, and they need to be incorporated into your programs so that you can continue to keep businesses along with their intellectual property, their digital assets, their personal financial information, all of that as protected as possible. So because of all of this, customer conversations that you have now need to lead with security and risk mitigation. And you should be aiming to educate prospects and your clients on the necessity of improving their overall security posture. Because net new customer acquisition, that continues to be the #1 challenge facing MSPs today. And the struggle is real because every business has an MSP that they're already using today. So the problem is, how can I steal business away from another MSP? Or, looking at, how do I set myself apart from all the other MSP competitors that I have in my space? So looking at this, now is the time for MSPs to reposition themselves, remarket themselves as cybersecurity experts, because that's a way that you can work to differentiate your MSP from your competitors. And we want to provide you with a way to do this by presenting to you today a security framework of which you can build kind of your new suite of security programs off of, because the growth opportunity for MSPs today is in security. And case in point, there was a 2020 security services trend report that came out from the Robert Herjavec Group, and it found that of all the cyber threats facing organizations today, 73% list ransomware as their top threat concern for their organization, followed by 57% of respondents who listed loss of customer data as their top threat, while 39% listed email account compromise as their top threat. And from that same report, 37% of organizations said that security is their top priority for their executive management team, and 42% of organizations expect to increase their budgets when it comes to security services for IT. And so because of all of this, MSPs need to have a plan and put a plan in place to start rejuvenating that security conversation with their customers. Because security, it's a green space. It's wide open. Customers want to be having these conversations with their service provider, and they expect to be speaking to them about their security concerns that they have. So lots of great benefits to going in this direction. There's enormous revenue opportunities to be had by revamping what you might be offering today and moving forward with a more security first mindset and messaging when working with your customers and your prospects.
Thank you, Stefanie. All right, so we're going to get now into the first section. We're going to be covering security, information security, cybersecurity. Which is it? And we're going to take the time to go through this just to make sure we're all on the same page, the same base level of understanding about what we're talking about and what we're referring to. And also to kind of put it in perspective for yourself as well, whenever you're talking about it to your clients. You should choose a preferred terminology for what it is you're doing and keep that messaging consistent. That's more important than really what you describe it as. And why that is well, here we have information security, security, and cybersecurity. If you refer to, if you use the term information security, it's a all-encompassing way of talking about everything that happens in IT concerning security. The broad definition is this: the protection of information and information systems from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction of data in order to provide confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That is useful for academic discussions. It is not very useful for communicating what you do to clients. So most MSPs will instead use something like security to describe what they're handling. And for most MSPs, though, there's really not a difference between security and information security. It's just that security is a more accessible term to use whenever you're talking about these things. But unfortunately, it doesn't convey the full scope very well of what you're doing. Versus we have cybersecurity, which broad description, the ability to protect or defend the use of cyberspace from cyber attacks. Many of these services that you're offering, that other MSPs are offering, are either they are cybersecurity services themselves, and or they are complementary to cybersecurity services. And describing what you offer, what you do as cybersecurity has a lot more pop. It sounds more expensive. It helps also reduce client exploration. And the reason why it helps reduce client exploration is your clients are going to have a perception of what it is that you offer and you do for them. And if you just describe what you do loosely as security, then they may later find engagements with a security company, an MSSP, or another third party that comes in and says, hey, we can offer you compliance, or we can offer you elevated cybersecurity offerings. And then you could find yourself in a situation where you're having to provide asset and documentation to a third party about your client's environment for them to offer their service, that once you start digging into it is like 80% of what you were already doing. But because your client did not perceive what you were offering as cybersecurity, they went and engaged somebody else. So it's really important that you choose one of these terms, you stick with it, but make sure that it conveys to your clients the full scope of what it is you're giving them. Also, well, as we go through this, it's going to be helpful as well to be able to choose what your actual goals are. So are you pursuing certifications, compliance, best practices, or are you just hunting opportunities? If you're pursuing certification, you are in verticals that have industry recognized third-party audits for systems and processes and infrastructure to be compliant with a specific standard or control. If that's the types of clients you are providing services to, then well, your end goal is certification. That's what you're after. Or maybe there's not certification, maybe it's just compliance, and compliance is just adhering to requirements of a standard, but it's self-attestation. You're saying, yes, we are following these things. Or your goal could be that, well, you're not worried about certification or compliance. That's a little bit, that's over in the deep end of the pool that you don't want to go to. You just want best practices. You're looking to improve your security offerings just to better protect your clients and your own business interests. Or you're looking at this as from through the opportunity lens. You see security as a means to capitalize on the heightened awareness in the market today. All of these are completely valid motivations and goals to be pursuing around this. So if one of these aligns best with your motivations, great, own it. Another thing I want to cover before we get too deep into things is, well, set some baseline terminology, or whether, get everybody on the same page about what is meant whenever we talk about certain things in the security space. So these three things are not interchangeable, even though some people will sometimes use them interchanged in their marketing material or in their language or their conversations, but they're really not. A vulnerability is, simplest definition, weakness in a system that can be exploited or triggered to cause damage. You can have known and unknown vulnerabilities. A threat is any circumstance or event that can adversely impact operations. So a threat would be an APT group, a ransomware gang or cybercrime gang, natural disasters, inside employee threats, those types of things. Then a risk is the extent to which a vulnerability or threat will adversely impact the operations and the likelihood of such an occurrence happening. So it's how bad will it be and how likely is it to occur. So it's worth making sure that whenever you use these words, you're using them in the right context to convey the message that you want to be conveyed. There's also an important, just a realization here that's very useful for anybody that may not be on the technical side. Maybe you're operations management or sales or a MSP president or owner, but you're not on the technical side of things. You're on the business side. Well, something that kind of does not sink in for those that aren't in the trenches every day is that vulnerabilities will occur. You cannot keep them from happening. They already exist. Vulnerabilities exist in all systems at point of inception. Somebody just has to find them, and that's going to be cyber criminals, nation states, security researchers, or bounty hunters. If a security researcher or a bounty hunter finds a vulnerability, well, in general, that's great for the rest of the community because they're going to report it to the software vendors, collect a bounty, whatever, and then the software vendors will patch and update their systems. If it's discovered by cyber criminals or nation states, that's generally bad for us because that means they're going to wind up being leveraged in attacks in the future. So this realization, and this is just a hard fact of life, is that vulnerabilities are there. They will occur. You will never know about all of them. You just have to do your best to find them, and whenever you find them, remediate them. And that's another kind of an important little thing that needs to be kind of ingrained in your conversations as well, and why it is important to convey to your clients why vulnerability lifecycle management is an important part of what you're offering them. And a few more things here on just the common grounds on base knowledge. Risk is everywhere, and it starts as well. Risk is a combination of a couple of things. First, it's your assets. What are you trying to protect? Endpoints, web applications, people, data. And then there is the threats that are the events you're going to protect against. So ransomware, denial of service, phishing attacks. And then vulnerabilities are the weaknesses and gaps in protection that exist in your environments because of misconfiguration. Things like the print nightmare vulnerabilities that have been an issue for the past couple of months, not having a web application firewall, poor security awareness of end users. Those are all vulnerabilities. And all of those things added together is the risk, the potential loss or damage to an asset caused by a threat leveraging a vulnerability. Again, if you're not on the technical side, you're on the business side, it's very important to be able to make this readable to your clients. And on the technical side, you have to be able to make this readable to who you deal with internally with your organization. Everybody needs to kind of understand and be able to translate it to the next level for whoever they have to deal with. So the second section we're going to get into is the cybersecurity defense matrix. And this is going to be end up becoming a little lab that we'll be doing in a minute. But the cybersecurity defense matrix that we're going to be going over is based on the cyber defense matrix framework that was created by Sunil Yu, cyberdefensematrix.com. There is more than one way to use and fill out a cybersecurity defense matrix. We're just going to focus on one way of doing it today. I highly recommend that once you get through today's session and the lab, go check out the website and go look at the other ways, because there are dozens of different ways to fill one of these out. But its purpose for what we're using it for today is to provide you a way for you to visualize your security programs for yourself and your clients. It'll help you discover gaps in your managed service portfolio, and it'll also help you allow you to help prioritize most impact for least effort. Now, this is not the same as a risk matrix or a threat matrix. Those are completely different, but it's still going to be a useful exercise to step through today. So the original cybersecurity defense matrix consists of functions versus assets. And the functions here are, if anybody has seen the cybersecurity framework from NIST, you'll recognize that these are the functions that are there in that framework. The ability to identify, protect, detect, respond, and record against the individual assets. So devices, applications, networks, data, and users. You need to be able to, for each one of those assets, be able to identify the device, protect the device, detect when new devices are appearing, respond to incidents on the devices, and record those. And that's all about having good documentation and PSAs and ticketing and SOPs. But we'll get into the actual, you'll see how that plays out when we get into the actual spreadsheet here in a second. So how do you use the cybersecurity defense matrix? So the way we're going to be using it is we're going to have a goal. And our goal is going to be, in this case, well, the ability to know what is in a network, or being able to find obfuscated or rogue devices in a network. So for the ability to just know what's in a network, well, RMM and N-central's asset discovery can do a lot to facilitate that goal. And then syncing that out to an ITSM or PSA so that you can start getting some change control, documentation, history information about that will be a useful additional thing you can do. So it kind of works off of that whole concept of I need to achieve something. What tools am I going to use to achieve it? So we're going to go ahead and drop into the spreadsheet. And again, that is in the handout section. It'll be the Enable Cybersecurity Defense Matrix. Defense Matrix is just a little spreadsheet. And before we start filling it out, I'm going to just spend a minute kind of describing the color coding that's here. So first, we have the assets on the left. So we have internet, network, users, apps, device, and data. This is a little bit different than the traditional defense matrix, but I think it works out a little bit better for MSPs. Then you have the functions. You need to be identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. The color coding here is that here on the left in the green is pre-event structural awareness. So these are like I don't want to call them the dumb things that you do, but it's the baseline things that you should be doing without thinking about them, without having to have any complex additional things to it. You can just literally put a tool in this location, which is why we have technology over here on the left versus people on the right. That's because as you move to the right, you get to post-event situational awareness. And the further to the right you go, the more you're relying on technicians and people, prescribed processes that somebody's going to carry out, not a tool that does something for you. And of course, those are all underscored by the processes. So your technology, even though it's a tool, you are going to have an established process for using that tool. On the people side, you're going to have an established process for how somebody should respond or triage or escalate an event. So that's going to underpin everything that you're doing. That's why it's there. And we'll just start out first. And the goal here is not to fill out all of these squares your first time around. This is just you filling out what you know you do right now that you can easily say, yes, we're covering that. So whenever it comes to, we'll just pick something here and we'll say application. So identify. Well, how do we identify applications in our environments? Well, one thing you're probably going to do is you're probably going to use RMM or N-central for their software inventory capabilities. They can report some of that information back to you and they got it in asset tracking. Then, well, we've got that identified covered, but how do we protect applications? Well, we're going to be using MFA. It's going to be one thing to protect applications because any admin accounts for those need to be protected, which means, well, you need MFA if possible. But then you also are going to be tackling it with patch management. So third-party patching, you're going to want to make sure that your applications are up to date. That if a vulnerability occurs and that the vendor releases a significant update, you have a way of putting that update in place. For networks, so identifying networks. So again, this is something that you may tackle with RMM and N-central. You may leverage some additional tools. You may also use something like Nmap here to do discovery. You don't have to, again, you don't have to put just one item in each one of these blocks. If you're using multiple things to address these, great, put them in there. And then, well, how do we protect a network? Well, we're going to be using, firewalls, might be using, Meraki, pfSense, whatever you're using to actually protect the network. And for internet, well, we might not have anything on the identifying internet much more than just, hey, whether it's static IPs or the circuits for the client and having that recorded in your PSA. But then protecting on the internet, well, again, you may have an edge security device of some sort. You may have a firewall, something else. And then you've got the devices themselves. Again, you're probably going to be identifying the devices that you have in your environment through the asset information that's going to be gathered from RMN or in Central. But then you can also additionally say that we're going to do manual discovery. And well, what's manual discovery? Well, during your QBRs or your semi-annual business reviews with your clients, maybe somebody is actually going out and physically inspecting the site. They're going around and making sure that there aren't any, all of the ports on the racks are populated by the right patch cables and there's not some rogue device plugged in somewhere that it shouldn't be. Or you may be going around making sure that somebody hasn't popped open cases and replaced equipment or something. And then protecting the device, well, that's going to be up to your AV or your EDR solution, along with maybe anything like a Kensington lock for protecting your laptops, or having physical security in place to make sure a server room's physically locked, those types of things. Those are all things that you can come in here and figure out here and fill out on the identify and protect side. Then on the detect, respond, and recover, this is where you start getting into processes. This can all be kind of handled by tools for the most part. But once we get to the detect stage, well, that's whenever it starts trending to responses and processes that you're going to have in place. So let's say for detection, you want to have the ability to know that something is wrong with your client's connectivity. Multiple ways of doing that. If you were going to use one of our tools to do that, you would probably be using NetPath so that you could monitor the health of the connectivity from an endpoint to some internet resource. On the device side, well, if you're using AV here, then there's really, the AV can give you some detection, but it doesn't give you any response. The response is completely on technicians going and looking at its system and evaluating it after the AV catches something. But if you're using something like our EDR solution, that gives you the detect capabilities as well as the respond capabilities, as well as the recovery capabilities in automated fashions. So to start off, we're just going to give everybody, hopefully you've been filling out as we've been going, but we're just going to give everybody about 2 minutes, 3 minutes to quietly fill out these. Don't worry if you can't fill out all of the blocks. The purpose of the exercise is to find out what those empty spots are and what you can place into them. All right, so keep that handy. Don't close out that Excel spreadsheet because we're going to come back to that later on in the session. So hopefully once we've finished through the rest of it, you'll be able to come back and fill in the bottom section with the new knowledge you have, what you would like to start doing, what you would like to start filling in those blocks with. So next, we're going to be going over section 3, which is educating clients. And we'll hand that over to Stephanie so she can start.
Awesome, thank you. So we're just gonna flip to a little sales lesson for a little bit, because as you're going out and you're building, your new cybersecurity programs, a lot of the times the challenge that I hear from partners is, well, now I have to go and try and sell my new programs to my customers. Because again, going back to the fact that they already think you're doing this. So whether rightly or wrongly, if you're not doing everything that you can to protect your customer's network, but they think you are, then there's definitely going to be some education that's going to be made. So I want to kind of go through a couple of slides on how you can go about speaking to your customers about the changes that you need to make and why you need to make them. So education is tricky, again, especially around, trying to convince them, why you're making the changes and they need to subscribe to these new changes. So there's a couple of slides that I'm going to go through. They're animation slides. I personally love these slides. I use them all the time when I was in sales, and I think they do a really great job of trying to explain how an attack works. And once you kind of explain how an attack works, then it kind of makes sense, what I feel, to the customer. All right, this makes sense now. I understand why they're making these changes for me. So before I start going through these two slides, just to answer all the questions that we got this morning, these slides, I will be sending them out today or tomorrow to everybody that attended today. We normally don't make slides available because this is being recorded and it is going to be uploaded into the MSP Institute. But I did just get approval in between sessions today that I can send these two slides out so that you can incorporate them into your own EBR process, your executive business review process, into your sales process, so that you can use them to really educate your clients. Because as an MSP, you're very well aware how an attack proliferates through a customer's environment. But your customers, because they're not technical, they're likely not going to understand, or they don't understand, how an attack actually works and how it can impact all layers of their network. So I think by educating your customers first on how an attack works and explaining, how do the bad guys get in, and how are they able to steal, your organization's data, it's going to go a long way in helping to set the stage around why you're telling them that they need to change and why you need to implement what you're mandating to them in terms of security. So you'll have this slide and you're going to want to go through it with your customers to help paint that picture so that they can see your viewpoint on this matter. Because really the bottom line is, the goal of your cybersecurity and risk mitigation strategy is ultimately to protect what we refer to as a business's crown jewels, and that's their data. Data is their most important asset outside of their employees, and that's where the value is for the bad guys. That's what the bad guys are after, because without an organization's data, very likely that they could be put out of business. So to help position your new cybersecurity programs, education is going to be key. And so what you're going to see is just really kind of a different visualization of that spreadsheet that you were just working on. Where Lewis talked about your assets, this is what you're seeing here. So we have our data at the center, and then you have the different assets or the different layers that are surrounding that data. So we have our internet layer, we have our network layer, we have our people layer, we have our applications layer, and we have our device layer. And so it's not just that data is just stored at the device level, and we only need to protect at the device level, but we need to kind of protect all the different layers surrounding that data. And so that's why we promote, and why we want you to promote, this layered approach to cybersecurity, and why it's so important that when you're building out your framework, you want to aim to include features that protect each of these 5 distinct layers. Because nothing on its own is 100% guaranteed. Nothing on its own is going to provide 100% complete protection. So we need to educate our clients on why multiple pieces of software combined together in a bundled solution, that's what's required, so that we can provide the highest level of protection from those bad actors who want to get access into the network and to steal the data. Because again, data is where the value is. So how does an attack work? What's the complexity behind the attack? It's not just that somebody clicks on something. It's when somebody clicks on something and then it goes and causes this whole chain reaction, this whole domino effect, with the end result being that the device becomes encrypted, or worse, a breach is allowed to occur. So when we look at something like the Ryuk ransomware and how that type of attack can be successful. So it starts with that malicious email, that makes its way into the employee's inbox. and the end user believes that this email is actually legit. So it's generally is something like a phishing email. And so the end user, because they believe the email is legitimate, they go ahead and they click on that email. And then once they click on that email, a PowerShell code is then called. And then from that PowerShell code, it goes back to the internet to a payload server that resides in the cloud somewhere in the internet. And the payload server, that's where all that bad code is, right? That's stored for this particular piece of ransomware software. And from there, that payload server then installs a malicious malware file onto that device. And at this point, the end user isn't aware usually that anything out of the ordinary is going on. This is just kind of happening in the background. And then as soon as that file is activated, it then goes back to the internet to download a trick bot. And now this trick bot, can just maybe sit on that device. It's going to persist until that bad guy decides to activate it and then let it loose, or it could start running automatically on the machine once it's installed. It really just depends on the code. And then this is where the real trouble begins. If there isn't proper protection measures in place, we get that lateral spread that can take place across the network. And now we're infecting other employees' machines as well. And then that trick bot then starts to run on that device. And then all the machines then reach back out into the internet to download the ransomware software. And then all of a sudden, boom, that device has now become encrypted. So again, I find this slide, and you'll have a copy of it. I'll get it sent out today or tomorrow. But I find this slide incredibly enlightening because I'm not technical. I'm a non-techie. I'm business sales oriented. But I feel that, to me, this makes sense. This gives a really good demonstration at how a threat can proliferate through a customer's environment because somebody clicked on something that they shouldn't have because they received it via an email that they thought looked legit. And then you can see from this attack how this ransomware attack touches all 5 layers surrounding your customer's data. And then some layers are impacted more than once. So that's why a cybersecurity program just can't be focused at the device level. Protection is needed across all 5 layers. And that's how we need to be thinking about when we're redesigning our cybersecurity programs. So next slide, please. Perfect, thanks. And I like this slide because it helps to address that objection that I know you have heard or you will hear as you try to go about speaking to your customers about cybersecurity and why you need to introduce a new suite of services to them. Or maybe it's going to be a whole new program. Because again, going back to the fact, they think you're doing this anyway for them. So if you're not, it's going to mean some changes, and that inevitably is going to mean an increase in their monthly price. And so a lot of MSPs have difficulty justifying that price increase to their customers because their customers, they don't understand what these changes are and why they're being charged more from them because, again, they thought they were already being properly protected. So education, it's needed. We need to get customers to understand that things are different now. And as such, the services that you're recommending today, they're very different to what you recommended previously. 5 years ago, the traditional MSP's answer to security was AV, patch, firewall, backup, like what you're seeing here on the screen. And at that time, those services were fine. They provided sufficient protection coverage because threats weren't as sophisticated back then, and people were working in offices behind corporate firewalls. The thought process was, as long as you had a solid AV, you're basically golden. But in today's threat landscape, this isn't enough. So looking at our layered security diagram again, you can see that the old approach of AV, patch, firewall, and backup, there are layers that are left underprotected, and there's layers that are completely unprotected. And here I'm looking at the internet layer and the people layer specifically. So there's gaps, kind of going back to what Lewis was saying about the vulnerabilities and the gaps. There's gaps in this customer security coverage in the old model. So that old minimum standard for essential security, it now needs to change to now plug these gaps. And MSPs need to develop and promote more comprehensive security packages that now need to include a number of new security technologies, looking at replacing traditional AV at the device level with something like a next-gen AV, like an EDR, because it provides broader, more advanced protection against zero-day threats. It also includes the rollback capabilities so that you can get that device back to a pre-attack healthy state should something get through. And then we're also looking at email filtering and spam protection at the internet layer, and then DNS filtering. And then we're also looking at advanced firewall or secure web gateway at the internet layer. Because if we can stop that attack from even getting into the network and reaching that end user in the first place, that's a win. And then looking at the network layer, adding in network and log monitoring. And then at the people layer, adding in features such as password management and multi-factor authentication. And then at the application layer, adding in application control and vulnerability management. And then backup recovery testing, with the possibility of maybe implementing standby systems depending on the risk level of that client, so that we can ensure that all data can be recovered. Because again, should something get through, because nothing is 100% guaranteed, you want and need to include backup at all levels. And then looking at something like, security user training, as a possible add-on, something like a KnowBe4, very popular add-on with partners that deliver security services today. So looking at what your new minimum standard for security would now look like, it now looks like something like this. And so this would be kind of the complete picture that we need to look at today in terms of what is needed to protect a client's most important asset outside of its employees, and that's its data. So this idea is to help educate clients that that old model that they might still be under of AV, patch, firewall, backup, that is no longer sufficient. That is why changes are needed from a cybersecurity program design standpoint. And that is what is necessitating this bump that they're going to have to receive in their overall monthly price. So I'll hand it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. All right, so now we're going to go into section 4, and then we're going to be covering the benefits of building to a security framework. So of course, there's the monetary motivation, but we're going to go over the technical benefits first. So mitigations, whenever you're using a security framework, whenever you build to a specific one, you're taking advantage of the fact that industry and governments, governmental agencies, industry, academia have spent millions of man hours producing those best practices that are codified in those security frameworks. So take advantage of their hard work, stand on their shoulders. You'll have fewer blind spots if you follow a security framework, and engineers and technicians can catch a misconfiguration or errant behavior more easily because they know what the established security baselines are supposed to be for a client's environment. If you take the approach as an MSP that we support whatever you have, well, that is a valiant effort, and it's commendable to take that approach, especially whenever you're dealing with smaller clients. The downside to that is a technician or an engineer can go into a client's environment, look at something, know that it's not set up the best way that it's supposed to be set up, that something is actively wrong in that client's environment, but that's just the way they're set up, and they might not pursue it anymore. So using a security framework can encourage your technicians and engineers to remediate security deficiencies when found, not just brush it off as a peculiarity of that client's environment, and that if they fix it, they might break something. The longer you have operations aligned to a security framework, the more confident and proficient your team is going to become in delivering services on it. And reciprocally, your sales team will get better and more efficient at selling it. You're also able to hit multiple requirements for multiple standards by following a single security framework. So you can choose to build to a specific framework, but because you've done that, you will now be compliant with multiple different standards. So there's no need to rework your tools or your processes for clients that might have different requirements. Security requires automation, which can lead to huge gains in efficiency. And again, if you're building to an established security framework, you don't have to rebuild different automation for every client all the time. There will be a common resource pool of automation that you can pull from. And one of the end goals for all of this is that it should improve your KPIs. It should reduce end user support tickets. So you should have lower numbers of tickets. You should have faster resolution of tickets, both end user raised ones as well as internally raised tickets.
Agreed. And looking at the business benefits of building to a security framework, a lot of them are the same. This new approach to program design, it puts a much larger focus on standardization today. And we're really cautioning MSPs to move away from selling kind of that old methodology that we used to talk about in terms of a la carte, or moving away from offering and selling, bespoke type programs, because these types of options, they're now introducing unnecessary risk to both you as the MSP and your customer. Because if you think about it, you're the MSP, you're the trusted advisor, you're the expert. So you should be the solutions architect for your programs, because you have the security knowledge and you have the expertise. And as the MSP, you are responsible for designing your programs based on what you're seeing in the market today, in the market trends, and the new threat actors that are emerging in the space. Small and medium-sized business owners, they're largely non-technical in nature. And so they're not the experts, you are. So as the MSP, you cannot allow your customers to make their own decisions on what security features need to be included in their program. And you also shouldn't allow them to remove certain features in order to meet, some sort of preconceived budget or discretionary price point. Because if you allow that to happen, you're now introducing unnecessary risk to both of you. Because if something does happen to the customer and they get breached because you allow them to kind of pull out maybe a certain feature that you recommended, naturally their tendency is they're going to turn to you and they're going to blame you as their MSP, because your job is to protect them. So it is going to be very important to have those difficult conversations with your customers and be upfront with them, and have the confidence and have the ability to defend your cybersecurity packages that you're going to create and go to market with. Or maybe have to take that tough stance and walk away and maybe allow a lesser MSP to support them and let that other MSP assume all of that risk themselves. Because likely this really isn't the type of customer that you want to have anyway. MSPs want business partners who's going to respect their advice, that they're going to go ahead and make the necessary investments in their network and their network security, because they recognize your expertise, which they don't have. And so by introducing standardized programs that are rooted in the same technology stack, as Lewis had kind of talked about in his section, it's going to help with service delivery, because all of your programs are going to contain the same set of features. They're all going to be based on the same set of software solutions. So it's going to make it easier to provide consistent support, and it's going to improve how quickly, computer and network issues that pop up, how quickly they get resolved. So that's going to work to reduce the overall mean time to resolution for the client, which is going to help improve the customer's overall productivity, which is going to heighten their overall customer experience that they're going to have in working with you. And then this is turn going to make better use of all of your technical staff, from the service desk support reps to the level 2 to the level 3 engineers, as they only need to be experts and keep up with the training and the updates with your preferred security software, versus having to keep up with a myriad of software because maybe you allowed some customers to kind of keep what they already had in place, or because of a pricing concern, you went out and sourced a cheaper product for them. Because as you scale and as you grow, without standardization, it's going to make it very difficult for you to scale and remain efficient if you allow your customers to kind of dictate their own paths to support and customize their own program. And so if you kind of stick to your guns and stick to your standardized programs, this is going to provide you with the ability to maintain your program margins and have improved overall profitability, especially in the long run. And then lastly, by following that security framework, this is going from a sales and marketing perspective purely here, This is really going to help differentiate your MSP practice from others that are out there in the space, because you're going to then be able to go out, you're going to be able to tout that you follow recognized security standards, best practices, which provides better protection and peace of mind overall.
And there's a strong, reliance on each one of these approaches on the other. Your business and technical benefits of building to a security framework will reinforce each other. So as you're going through this process based on your skill set, if you're sales or you're marketing or you're more on the business side of things, well, that's where your strengths lie. And you may design your packages first and then rely on the more technical people on your team to figure out how you can deliver on that. Or you may be on the technical side of the house and you may be leading this effort. Well, you're going to go through the effort of saying, well, how are we going to technically implement these things? And then it's up to sales to, take what you've developed as your program and then, go from there. So you can start from either side. You can start from the technical side or you can start from the business side based on your strengths, but they are going to reinforce each other in the end. Now we're going to get into Section 5, which is security framework, standards, and compliance. Oh my. So this is the heavy lift section. This is where you're going to have to, this is where you're going to have to put in your own time and your own effort later. So just starting out, giving you some more baseline knowledge to work with, let's actually define what is a security framework. And simply, a security framework is just a collection of standards, best practices, and other guidelines for managing security risk. Some of the popular ones are the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, the CIS controls, the ISO 27000 series, which usually you're not worried with until you get to the enterprise level. There's the ASD Information Security Manual for the Australians, the NIS directive, and then there's also the option to just rolling your own. That it's not that it's something that you can't do, it's just probably not where you should start if you've never worked with a security framework before. So frameworks versus standards versus compliance. This is another thing that gets confused. These words get interchanged sometimes and it muddies the messaging. So it's good to have a good grasp on these. And you're going to use frameworks. You're going to build to a framework that uses standards so you can reach compliance. Is kind of the way it goes. Your frameworks, again, there's the collections of your recommendations based on existing standards and guidelines. It will usually tell you what you should protect, not necessarily how or with what. And then standards are usually more well-defined and tailored for specific industries or verticals. And it gives you a minimum, better definition of the minimum things that you should be doing. It can dictate more specifics than a framework. And some examples of those are like the NIST 800-171 or PCI DSS or FedRAMP. Compliance is a whole other ball game. Being compliant with something, you can be compliant to a standard. You can also sort of kind of be compliant to a framework, but it's not exactly the same meaning. But you can be compliant to a standard, and becoming certified as being compliant to a standard requires third-party audits. But most of the time, for most MSPs, we've traditionally just self-attested that we are compliant with certain standards. So you would go to your client and you would do your audits and you would tell them that, yes, you are compliant with NIST 53. Here's our sign off on it so you can give it to your insurance for compliance purposes. And that's been good enough for a long time. There are the fact, though, that third-party accreditation is becoming more popular. Some of that accreditation is not worth the paper that it's written on. Other ones are very much worth it. A good example of that are the CMMC requirements. So for anybody that's familiar with those, you already know what the story is on this, but for those that are unfamiliar with the CMMC is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And this is something that has been established by the DoD, and it's in play now. The final cutoff date by which time you must become CMMC accredited has been pushed to the future a little bit, but there's a line in the sand for it. you will have to go and be audited and receive certification from a federally recognized third-party auditor in order to receive CMMC certification of a specific level. And if you want to hold a federal contract, you will have to have CMMC certification. For a lot of us here today, that's probably not going to matter, but for some of us, it probably does matter. But looking to the future, it's worth being aware of it and knowing about it because, well, back in the day, whenever they first established the NIST 800 171 standards, they were considered federal standards. They were meant for federal entities. They have removed the federal entity description from the NIST for a while now. They are intended for all industries. And over time, it went from federal use to state use to municipalities and townships, and private organizations and entities have started requiring that NIST 800-171 be followed. It will not be unlikely in the future that the CMMC will take the same path. At some point, there may be CMMC may evolve, or there may be a companion standard or certification similar to it that states start using or municipalities start using, just like they started using the NIST. And just as is that really a concern? Some extra homework for everybody. Go out and look up Louisiana's law on registering as an MSP with the state. Regulations are already coming. They are forming. The speed at which they come and what they are going to entail, nobody knows. Something you should be preparing for, though, and definitely be aware of. So you already have a security framework, but is it time to mature it? So the sum of your services and how you implement them and your documentation and your procedures, this is all part of your current security framework. Is it well documented? Is it robust enough? Well, that's the question. And building a robust framework from scratch is doable, but it's probably not where you should start. And the reason why is because if you're trying to build out the framework yourself, well, you're having to rely on your own knowledge, your own experience, and not leveraging all of that other global knowledge that exists. But also by using an established framework, you can meet multiple standards at once. And that can help you standardize your technical operations across the board. So you don't have to refigure out how you're going to deliver your services to one client versus the other versus the other versus the other. You're able to start delivering standardized services based on a classification of a client versus the individual client. So into section 6, how to choose a framework. So selection of a security framework is dependent on a few things. One is what your current client verticals are. You're not going to choose a framework that is not relevant to the type of clients you currently support or the type of clients you would like to support in the future. So if you want to go after new verticals, you need to consider that whenever you're choosing your framework. What standards are required of those verticals are going to be important. And also, what are your available resources? If you are maybe just a small MSP that your largest client is less than 50 endpoints, and you're just doing retail lawyer offices and maybe a small medical office somewhere, your resources are going to be limited. You're probably not going to be able to dive into the deep end with the NIST cybersecurity framework. You're probably going to be better served by going for a more narrowly tailored framework. And the two frameworks that I'm going to talk about that are, for consideration, especially for anybody that's in the U.S., is going to be the NIST cybersecurity and the CIS controls. So the NIST cybersecurity framework is based off of 5 core functions, and these are the same functions that were in the cyber defense matrix: the ability to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. There's also 4 tiers of implementation. So maybe you are that smaller MSP that's only going to be supporting those smaller, less sensitive clients. You're probably only going to be implementing 1 tier of the controls versus 2 or 3 or 4 of them based on complexity of your client's environment. Using the NIST cybersecurity framework can still help you find coverage gaps in your portfolio. And it does reference multiple other standards, though, and that's probably the weakness of the NIST cybersecurity framework. It itself is not the totality of the framework. It just references all of these other standards and controls that are a part of other standards and documentation elsewhere. So you'll see that later, how that kind of works out. Then we have the CIS controls. The CIS controls are broken into 18 control groups, with each one of those control groups having multiple subcontrols. It is designed and built around the concept of least effort for best returns, and that works very well for the MSP space and our clients. There are 3 implementation groups in CIS. One is based on the complexity of the client's environment, and it leaves actually little room to miss something. If you go through all of the controls that are there and available in the CIS and you check off and say, yes, we're doing this, there's not going to be any gaps in the end. It's great for building scalable, repeatable security packages quickly, and it's mostly self-contained. It does not reference other standards or controls. Everything is within it. If you need something that you can implement today, so there's no good shortcuts when it comes to cybersecurity, but of course there's ways of getting a head start. So what can you implement today? Here's a few things that are going to be common across all standards, all security controls, all best practices at this point. Patch management, where critical patches applied within 7 days. This is a decision that you can make today and enact it tomorrow. You're going to change your settings in patch management to say criticals are being applied more quickly. Maybe you decide it's going to be 5 days instead of 7 days. Whatever you decide, you can do that now. Enabling MFA for all platforms where available. This one will be a little bit more trickier. There might be some end user notification and training that might have to happen. But if you have MFA available, it needs to be enabled. Yes, some people find it inconvenient. They complain about it. But with the access of what I have access to here at Enable, I probably have to use an MFA token probably 23 times a day. So it's one of those, yes, it's inconvenient, but security is not supposed to be that convenient. Start using a password manager to encourage complex and unique passwords. End users, whether that's client end users, technicians, or engineers, or yourself, telling them that they should use unique passwords that are sufficiently long there's no way to really encourage that or monitor that if you're not using a password manager. Everybody's on the honor system, and there's no real way to audit that in any significant way. So using a password manager, though, it will make it convenient for them to do that. You're able to put in controls, so you can say that the password manager will randomly generate the passwords for them of a 14 character length. Our Passportal product also has the ability to do one-time temporary tokens as well. So for MFA setup, switching from an AV to an EPP platform, so endpoint protection platform of some sort. Standard AV, it was part of that core baseline years ago. It was good enough, maybe 8 years ago, 7 years ago, but since then, really, if you are selling services, managed services to a client, AV really is not enough anymore. Also, automate getting backups off-site. This is one of those things that, regardless of what solution you're using out there, originally the inclination and the mentality was you get your full image system backups, you get them done, you get them on site because you can't afford the bandwidth to get them off-site immediately, and you just kind of try to get critical data and some other differentials out of the environment every once in a while. That approach has been shifting. It has shifted towards getting backups offsite as the primary function being the desirable outcome. The Enable backup solution, it does that, and it does it very well because it's doing, we do Delta versions of backup. So once we get that full first backup of a system, we never have to do another full backup of the system. We only have to capture the changes. And because we're only capturing the changes, those can go offsite quickly and conveniently. And you will honestly have environments using more bandwidth on YouTube and streaming music than you will on your backup if you take that approach. Also, you can follow the Enable Security Service program and that gives you, again, it's a good starting point without having to think much about it. It's all laid out for you. You can choose one and roll with it. So now we're
Exactly.
going to go over to Stephanie for her section, building business processes and owning risk.
So just kind of going back into the business world for a moment and talking about building business processes and owning the risk. So although up until this point, we've been using the term security a lot and cybersecurity, the conversations, and this is where we're putting our sales hat back on, the conversations that we really need to be having with our customers should actually be focused on risk. Risk identification, risk tolerance, risk mitigation, and most importantly, I think risk ownership, because security tends to be binary, are you secure or are you not secure? But that's not the conversation that MSPs need to be having with their clients, because it isn't really about whether a business is secure or not. It's about how much risk are they exposed to and how much ownership of that risk do they want to manage themselves versus offloading that risk and transferring that risk over to you as their MSP. And that risk really comes down to that end user, because we know that employees tend to be the cause, unfortunately, of a lot of breaches in most cases. There's a lot of potential risk between what happens between the chair and the keyboard. So MSPs really need to do whatever they can to bubble wrap that end user to help prevent a breach from happening. But there's other risk factors that need to be taken into account as well. We can't blame it all on the end users. And so when we talk about assessing a company's overall risk and giving them a rating, we're looking at things like what industry are they in, what's their annual revenues, what's their employee size, what amount of data are they collecting, and what type of data are they collecting, and what types of vendor partnerships do they have. And then we use this information to help us determine what tactics or what strategies do we use, and what is the ideal cybersecurity program do you need to put in place for that customer to help mitigate that risk. So risk, we really need to think about it as being on a scale, so again, depending on their industry, their size, the types of data that they're collecting and using, there's going to be some businesses that are going to be exposed to higher levels of risk. And therefore, when you're looking at your cybersecurity framework, you're going to want to build a more comprehensive security package, while there's going to be other businesses that may have lower levels of risk and may not require such an extensive package. And so really the key when you're building out your framework and looking at what you're going to take to market to sell to your customers, the key is to understand your customers, their businesses, their industries, their business risk exposure, and then making sure that we're building out security plans that help to mitigate and lower that risk exposure accordingly. So while you're working on building out your cybersecurity framework, this is an exercise that I would really encourage you to do. You want to conduct a review of your customer base or of your ideal client base if you're doing some brand new marketing around them, to assess each client's overall risk level and their risk tolerance. And so this is just as easy as opening up an Excel spreadsheet, listing out all of your clients, and then having a column right next to it with giving it a risk rating, whether we're going to give them a rating of high, medium, or low with respect to their risk level. And so to help you with this categorization or this segmentation process, when we talk about a high risk business, these are the types of organizations that will require a more comprehensive type of security package, because they're a business that, they likely reside in the financial or in the healthcare sector. They're fairly large in size. So, as a result, they're accumulating a vast amount of data that would be really attractive to adversaries. These types of organizations have employees that have access to highly sensitive systems, and they have access to vast amount of customer and company data and potentially financial data. And these employees have access to valuable company intellectual property as well. Typically a high-risk organization, they have partnerships or relationships with other large key businesses or organizations, and as a result, their employees would have access likely to this type of valuable information because of those partnerships. And should a business, a high-risk business, become breached or experience some sort of ransomware attack, that maybe was successful in stealing data, that would be detrimental, most likely, to their business, which could result in irreparable harm, and it could be a possible extinction event for them. So then looking at a medium risk business, these types of organizations, they have, some attractive data, some attractive partner relationships, but they have a smaller footprint in terms of their data volumes, in terms of their company size and overall revenues. But, because of this, they would still be considered a target because of the data or the access to that data that employees may have. And then when we look at a low risk business, and these are the types of organizations that would be good for your minimum viable program, because going back to what I was saying earlier, that the a la carte, methodology, bespoke programs trying to meet a certain price point, we can't offer that anymore. It's just too risky to you as the MSP. So a low risk business, you would want to create, if you have a lot of these, a minimum viable security program for them. And I would consider a low risk business as one that's pretty small in size. They have a limited number of employees, a limited number of partnerships. They're not really collecting and storing a whole lot of valuable data. A lot of their financial processing is outsourced to third-party companies, so it's not even done in-house. And if they were breached, likely wouldn't be detrimental to their business. Their business would likely survive. So we would consider the breach impact to be low. So not really a real target to adversaries, but that's not to say that they don't need proper protection levels as well, because at the end of the day, this is a business, for hackers. They don't really care about the data that any of these organizations have. They just want the money. They just want the ransom. So all businesses, big or small, really do require a minimum level of security. And so going back to what Lewis was saying, that there's a lot of homework involved in going through the different standards, selecting your standard, and then building your security framework around one of those standards. But if you need something today to go to market because you need to, you've redesigned and completed your segmentation exercise, and you understand and know that you need to make some changes, here is something that you can use to get you started. So just to answer everybody's questions, because I know it's on your mind, I will be sending out an Excel copy of this either today or tomorrow to everybody that attended, because this was just an Excel spreadsheet that I took a screenshot for, but you'll likely want to kind of play around with it. But the idea is this, that I worked on it with Lewis, and I worked on it with David Weeks, and I presented it to some members of our Partner Advisory Council for their feedback. So this is just something to get you started, because really the goal of this new structure is to help you capitalize on the significant revenue opportunities that currently exist in the marketplace. There are a lot of businesses out there that aren't properly protected, they're underprotected, and so there's a need for MSPs to provide education to small and medium-sized businesses on how to best improve their security posture so that they can lower their overall risk of attack. And so for this program outline that you're seeing, this was designed for outsourced IT services. And what I mean by that is, this is for your traditional MSP clients that don't have anybody internal handling their IT. So you're going to be considered their outsourced or offsite IT department. Not to be said that you can't use this to work at a co-managed level. It just wasn't designed with that in mind. But you can definitely take aspects and pieces of this, maybe a block, and sell that to mid-market companies who might need a certain, maybe there's a knowledge gap, or maybe there's a resource gap, and they need you, or you could be useful in helping to complete one of these blocks. So just kind of my little caveat there. And as I said, this is just an initial framework. Each program level that you're seeing here, the essentials, the advanced, the comprehensive plus, each program level has its own philosophy and has its own customer type. Kind of going back to the the risk ratings that I just asked you to complete, the high, medium, and low. But feel free to change this up, as you feel it's necessary. You know your customers, you know your market best. There may be some technologies that you have that might be missing from this chart. And if there are, please let me know, and let me know where you would place that technology or that consulting service, because this really is Rev 1 of this chart. This is the second time that we're delivering this boot camp. And so as it gets into the regular rotation for the boot camp cycle, as we get more feedback from partners, I'm absolutely positive that this is going to change. But really the primary point that I want to make with this is that, starting at the essentials, every MSP needs to have a minimum viable security program that every customer gets enrolled in. And then it goes up from there, depending on that risk rating and that risk tolerance and the risk ownership preferences of your clients. And so starting at the left-hand side, we have our essential security program. As I keep reiterating, this is the base program level an MSP would offer. It's the minimum set of core services that every company has to have, and you don't sell below this. We strongly recommend don't strip out any of these services in a desire to reduce your price to meet a customer's monthly budget or price point. And so looking at your essentials program here, we've broken it down into 6 different categories: IT services, security services, backup training, consulting, reporting, and then support services. So looking at the IT services section, everything you would find in a standard proactive program standpoint with respect to comprehensive device monitoring, proactive preventative maintenance, that's all included for every single device that is discovered by N-central or RMM. And that is part of the monitoring and maintenance activities for this program. Looking at the minimum security services that you include. And again, this really works to cover each of those layers that we talked about that surrounds the client's data. So looking at doing a monthly security risk assessment, making sure that we're monitoring and managing the firewall correctly, having some sort of endpoint protection in place. I have AV or EDR here. Our strongest recommendations is moving towards EDR, but at the end of the day, you should really have something to standardize on. And maybe you have some really low risk clients that you don't need the EDR. So that's why I'm kind of giving, either or here, but some sort of endpoint protection is necessary. Making sure that we're completing a full patch management for both Windows and third-party application. Making sure that we're putting mail filtering and mail protection in place at the internet level, because again, if we can block it from even getting to the end user in the first place, that's a win. And then making sure we're putting in 2FA and password management as well. Looking at the minimum backup services that you would include at this level. And backup should be included in every single program that you offer. So looking at desktop backup of maybe your critical documents, your Word, your Excel, your PowerPoint, your PDFs as a minimum. Backing up a server if there is one on site, or if this is a cloud customer, maybe the customer has an M365 account, then you would back up the user's M365 account. So their email, their OneDrive, their SharePoint. From a training perspective, making sure that we're including some basic security awareness training. And what I'm thinking here is something like a 2-hour session once a year, maybe teaching end users on phishing. What's phishing? How can they recognize a phishing email? Something like that. And then looking at the consulting and reporting, you're doing this already, providing your monthly reports, helping out with some life cycle planning, meeting with them, hopefully somewhat regularly. So here I'm saying, twice a year, sit down, conduct an executive business review with them, find out what's going on in their business and in their industry, what are their growth plans, what are they looking to achieve, and then how are you going to help them achieve that, so that you can help build out your sales pipeline and forecast for future projects, based on these conversations. And then in regards to support services, at this level, everything would pretty much be a la carte from a support perspective. Everything would be billed on a time material basis. So all help desk calls, emails, chat, emergency support, reactive support, vendor management, all of those reactive type of support requests, those would get billed at your time material rate, or maybe you're the type of MSP that offers blocks, and so you can just kind of pull it off of the block. And then, looking at the advanced security program, so this would be ideal for any of your customers that you have identified as being at least a medium risk, or even your low risk. You may, want to offer them the advanced. So the advanced security is really what I was thinking for your medium risk businesses, because this is where we're really beginning to see the shift of risk ownership, from the business owner over to the MSP. This is where the MSP is beginning to assume more and more of that customer's business risk. And because of that, MSPs need to include a more advanced set of security features and consulting services in order to better provide, increased protection coverage and to help mitigate that risk. So looking at the security features that we're including at this level, minimum EDR at this point, traditional AV is not going to be sufficient for a medium risk client. And then adding in other things like anti-phishing, dark web monitoring, DNS filtering, disk encryption, vulnerability management, possibly mail archiving. Then looking at the additional backup features that you would include, no longer being concerned with just backing up critical documents, but backing up the complete desktop. So all documents, if there's movies on there, if there's JPEGs or pictures, the system state as well. From the server perspective, here we're not, again, just focused on backing up the data, but doing the full data and system state backup, starting to incorporate disaster recovery planning in here and testing of the backup solution. From a training perspective, including advanced security awareness training, and then you define what this is, but this is generally where you would outsource this or bring in a third-party company to offer ongoing training, whether this is quarterly training or whether this is, a more advanced session a couple of times a year, but something more than what you would offer in your essentials. And then from a consulting and reporting services standpoint, because we are building in a higher security focus, there's going to be, more security-centered type of consulting that you're going to need to include in here. Especially around compliance, data access controls, helping them create security policies, security control recommendations and enforcement of those recommendations. Moving your regular meetings from semi-annual to quarterly executive business reviews. So again, having those regular conversations with customers to make sure that there's still alignment with your technology and your security standards. And if there's gaps, educating them to those gaps and putting a plan in place so that you can continually work to close those gaps, because gaps means risk. Risk to you as the MSP and risk to your client. And then from a support services standpoint, the philosophy here, I'm really leaving it up to you, because this can really, this will depend on how you position your advanced program. If this is going to be your top program, so maybe you decide I only need 2 programs, I have low risk clients and I have medium risk clients. So my advanced program is going to be where everything is included in it, including the support. That could be one approach. Or maybe your advanced program is your middle program, and so we're going to keep the reactive element still reactive, and we're still going to charge on a time material basis for you, because you're going to offer, and I'm going to talk to it momentarily, the comprehensive. So the support services, I kind of leave it up to you to how do you want to address it, depending on where it fits into your overall program mix. And then for very high risk clients, again, looking at those verticals like medical, banking, government entities, these are industries where data carries a high degree of sensitivity and value out there on the dark web. So this is where you really need to make sure that you're delivering enhanced security services so that you can further mitigate risk and protect your clients. And here at this comprehensive level, we are basically, as the MSP, taking on or agreeing to take on the bulk of the risk of the business owner. We're taking it from the business owner and we're placing it basically on our shoulders. So we need to make sure that we have the proper tool sets in place to be able to accept and do what we can to mitigate that risk. And so there's really 2 levels here. I have a comprehensive and then a comprehensive plus MSSP. And the reason that I'm doing this is depending again on your customers and depending on their needs, and also depending on your skill sets, the people, the resources that you have, there could be services that you know your clients need, but you can't offer them. But there's nothing wrong with going out and partnering with somebody like an MSSP to help you deliver those services. There's nothing wrong with that. It's completely okay. So if you have a client where you know they need, SIM management or SOC or MDR or advanced threat protection, pen testing, and you don't have the skill sets, the people, the resources, or the tools to do that, don't let that limit you from being able to offer that type of program to your customers. Just recognize that you just need to go get help, and then you build that into your overall product mix. And another note that I kind of want to say along that lines is this is not meant on what we offer exclusively at Enable. We can pretty much tackle everything at the essentials level and a little bit at the advanced. So you're going to have to go out and do your due diligence and go and find proper tool sets to kind of help fulfill and deliver some of these services. So we obviously would love it if you looked at what we have and that you incorporate it. But at the end of the day, this is just meant to provide you with the framework so that you can go out and use it if you need something today while you work on the more advanced structure that Lewis was talking about. And, a little case study, a little story that I have around this, because we have seen partners experience significant improvements in their overall revenue growth and market penetration because they did adopt this standardized approach and this framework like we're talking about today. And the most amazing business transformation story that I have comes from a former partner of mine whose account I used to manage a few years ago when I was their account manager. And, when I took that account on, they were primarily doing a la carte, and they were primarily supporting, whatever it is that the customer had. They weren't very focused on program design, program structure, program standardization. They didn't want to be difficult for the client, so they just did whatever the client told them to do, and they supported whatever the client wanted. So the client was in charge, and they just kind of went along with it. And so they were really doubting that what I was telling them would actually work in real life. And then I had the good fortune of meeting up with them at one of our Empower events back before COVID in Scottsdale. And I knew that if I wasn't able to convince them, because again, I'm a vendor, I knew one of my other partners who was following these exact design principles that I was talking about, or I am talking about today. I connected I don't want to say my good partner, but I connected that partner with my doubting partner. Because I really wanted my doubting partner to embrace the standardization approach to the program design. And fortunately, they really hit it off. And so by the end of the Empower event, my doubting partner, they were convinced that this was the right step, that they needed to take a firmer approach when it came to security, when it came to standardization across their customer base. And so we worked together to help them really redesign their packages using a model like what you're seeing here on the screen. And so during this time, they also recognized that they wanted to be more verticalized. And so they started to focus exclusively on banks and on credit unions. And they modeled their programs around what those organizations needed from a security and compliance standpoint. And so fast forward to today, they've actually grown to become one of the most predominant MSSPs in their area. And they promote their security framework as their key differentiator when they're speaking to bank presidents and CEOs. And that's why they're getting selected. That's why they're winning out, is because they're openly talking about, what they do from a security perspective. And they've done so well that they've made the MSP 501 list for the last 3 years in a row. And I think this year they actually cracked the 100 mark. I think they were 60 or 61 or something like that, or somewhere in there. But it really all started by then making a decision to standardize on their program offerings. They decided to go all in and focus on banks and credit unions and really learned and researched what they needed from a security and compliance perspective. And they stopped allowing their customers to design their own path to support. They stopped allowing their customers to augment or remove features in order to meet a price point. And they got the pricing objections from their customers, especially in the beginning when they were going out to talking to them. But they did really change their sales process and change their marketing to more of an education campaigns. And they really worked to explain why they were making the changes that they were recommending, which did help to educate their customers and help the customer understand, that reasoning as well. So pass it over back to you, Lewis.
All right, and now that we've gone over that, we're going to bring back up the cybersecurity defense matrix. So now that Stefanie's gone through her the services packages, and we've talked a little bit more about everything, now it's an opportunity to go back and fill in the cybersecurity defense matrix again with the new knowledge you have. So we're going to just take 3 minutes here to give people time to fill this out, and the whole goal here for you should be that now that we've gone through the content and hopefully you're a little bit more comfortable with these things, start filling in any gaps that you have, or maybe you want to just start over again and fill it out in a different way, whichever works for you. But work through this section and fill out any of those empty spots. So where we're saying, we were making the reference to, on the different layers, internet layers. So we need to be able to, what can we do to identify and protect there? So if we're going to be going with just what's available through N-Central's, through Enable's offerings, then on the internet level, we'll probably say, well, we're going to be using web protection, or we may be using DNS filter. And then on the device layer, okay, we're going to be using EDR, but then we may also be using some log aggregator of some sort that you already have available. For backup, so we'll go the full chain with the backup here. We're going to say identify. So we're going to say here, we're going to use risk intelligence. Say you can replace this with any other tool, a grep tool of some sort, or any other type of discovery tool you have available, but we'll say we use risk intelligence to identify sensitive data at rest in your environment, to find where, along with what you discover just by what you have available in shares, what you've set up for the client, the manual inspection of their data stores, wherever it may be, and then also the risk intelligence to find sensitive data being stored in places you may not have known to look for it. Then you can also, we're going to protect that by using backup. And we're going to be doing that as backup offsite and backup on-site, so that we have the ability that whenever something happens, we got our choice of source. And on the detect side of this, well, what the detection part of this would be the monitoring. So the ongoing monitoring of backups, and if something is damaged of those backups, or whether your test restores don't work. So your recovery testing would also be here. And then also if you're backing up an SQL database, then SQL integrity checking. Maybe once a month or once a quarter, you load up some sample backups, mount them, and run the SQL integrity queries against them to verify that they're in good shape. And then the respond part will be, well, whenever we respond, we're going to be following our SOP, whatever our established SOP is for something happening to one of those sources. And then on the recovery side, still, we're going to be following our SOP based on whatever happens. So if the recovery testing fails, what do we respond and how do we recover? How do we get a new, fresh, good backup would be the recovery step, or putting it back into production. But again, this is, for the most part, with what we've covered today, you should be able to fill out everything on the left-hand side for all of your pre-event structural awareness. These are all of the technology, the tools that you set up. You should be able to populate everything on the left And most of these blocks should get multiple things filled in for them. And then on the detect, respond, and recover side, well, this is going to vary widely based on your current maturity, your current security maturity levels, your resources, um, your skill sets of employees. All those things are going to heavily dictate whether you're doing these now or if you decide that you do want to start expanding over in here. So let's go with, say, the EDR if we were doing AV. So if you're just using AV protection, then well, your AV will still allow you to detect things, but the respond and the recover is going to be taken care of by people. A technician is going to have to get involved, follow your established procedures and protocols for your incident response, and do these things, whatever they may be. But if you're leveraging EDR, well, your EDR is still going to be able to protect and detect, but it's also going to be able to do the response for you and the recovery for you. So for the response section, well, you'll have your alerts and everything, and the EDR has the automated remediation capability in it. So a technician or a engineer does not have to do the remediation on the endpoint to fix the system setting changes, the registry key changes, configurations that was done by a threat. And then the recovery option is, well, letting EDR's rollback capability come into play, the rollback files that were touched. And well, that's a big difference. This switch here, just this one switch from going from AV to EDR, you've now reduced the amount of labor that it costs to deliver on this. You've gotten rid of the respond and recover labor, probably 95, 99% of it. It can now be automated to such a degree that EDR can just take care of it for you. Now, you may decide that you're also, again, this is part of that whole adding, what you can to what you're doing. You may decide that you're going to do EDR, but then you're also, instead of just letting EDR automate the response for you, your first responder, your engineers, your technicians, part of their job description is after EDR catches something and detects it and it remediates it, well, an incident response report has to be prepared. And part of your packages that you're building can include that in it. That, yes, you're paying for the EDR in the service, but you're also paying for this extra service that we're laying over top of it, where we will take the time to look at an event, assess it, and decide if additional remediation or mitigation is warranted, and prepare a written report for you. That, because of the way EDR is set up and the way it operates, a technician or an engineer may only have to spend 10 minutes or 15 minutes preparing that report, but that could be part of your justification of why your prices are increasing. So there's a lot of opportunities that, as you're filling out all of these things, you can wind up with multiple items in each one of these blocks to represent the services that you are going to build. Or maybe if you just come in here and fill it with what you're currently doing, which is what we've already done, but now that you're more familiar with it, do it again. Fill in everything you currently do, and anywhere you have a block that's empty or anywhere you have a block that only has one thing listed in it, well, it's going to be worth going and exploring and figuring out, well, what can I put in that block? And figuring out, well, what would I put in that block is going to be part of the selecting your tools and creating your processes to implement a cybersecurity framework. And that leads us into our next section. Tool selection and process creation. This is the technical and operations heavy lift for everything we're going over today. After you've decided which framework you're going to go with, it's going to be time to start selecting the tools and defining the processes required by it. If you start with the enable security, the service program outline that Stefanie went through, well, you have a minimum viable selection of tools to start with tomorrow. There will still be some gaps in there that cannot be filled by us. We do not have the tools for it, and that's where you may have to go and get a SIM, a SOC, a SOAR, something similar. And you're going to work through and create processes that are going to be defined one control at a time. And as you define these processes, they can become your SOP manual. So as you're working through this, first time through it, you may be just doing check marks and say, yes, we can do this. Yes, we can do this. Yes, we can do this. But part of the process should be good documentation of how you're going to do it and what the workflows day to day around it are going to be. Because in the end, you want to have an operations manual where you can hire a new employee, they can come in, they can have access to their portion of the operations manual that's pertinent to their role, and not have many, if any, blind spots on what they should do and how they should do it. So some security frameworks are harder to work with than others. We went over this a little bit earlier whenever we're comparing the NIST cybersecurity framework to the CIS, but we're going to spend just a minute or three going through, well, really, what do I mean by it's more complicated? And, is that a challenge for you to overcome, or is that a warning for you to heed? Here we're looking at the NIST cybersecurity framework, and specifically the AC5 control. So whenever you look in the cybersecurity framework and look this up, it's going to reference other standards. It's going to reference the NIST 853, and it's going to be referencing these other individual elements within it. So the AC40 information flow enforcement, and that reads as in the documentation, enforce approved authorizations for controlling the flow of information within the system and between connected systems. That is an esoteric statement that you have to unravel to be able to understand what it's asking of you. And there's 32 sub items for that. And then whenever we run down to AC10, which is another thing that the cybersecurity framework says we should be doing, concurrent session control, limit the number of concurrent sessions for each account to a defined number. Well, that's fairly straightforward. That one's easy to understand. Well, I'm only going to let, I'm going to go to AD to Azure AD, and I'm going to set it up so users can only be logged in from one location at a time. Go to our web applications and make sure that somebody can only be logged in from one location or behind one IP address at a time. And then there's SC7 boundary protection that has another 29 sub items in it. And if you are servicing clients that need that, well, it's it's a necessary evil. You have to go through this. But if you don't have to, well, then the CIS controls, here we're looking at CIS control 12 for network infrastructure management. So this is the CIS's answer to what NIST cybersecurity framework was asking for us. With CIS, it's one control group that has 8 clearly defined subcontrols, and each one of those defined subcontrols are fairly easy to read and understand what they are asking of you. So here we have for 12.1, ensure network infrastructure is up to date. That's easy to understand. So there is going to be a big difference in how you're going to implement and the amount of effort that's going to go into implementing one versus the other, even though you might end up with the same tools and the same processes in place by the end. So if we chose to follow the CIS controls, well, how would you implement them? So CIS control 12.1, ensure network infrastructure is up to date. Well, how would you do this? Well, you would go out and you would subscribe to status updates and release notes from your network appliance vendors or your network as a service vendors. You'd want to automate checking the firmware versions of the hardware against the expected version, and manually checking the firmware versions against it can also be done, but that's if you're manually doing it, you're not going to be as efficient at it, and oops, we skipped it 1 month. But you'll need to be able to, whatever you choose there, to document it, monitor it, and verify it. This is one of those reasons, it's one of the buried reasons that whenever you start teasing things out, it makes perfect sense. But sometimes MSPs at certain parts of their journey will defer to the clients. And they'll say, sure, we will support what you have here. You can keep using your equipment, we'll just support it. The downside to that is the more clients you obtain, the more stacks of equipment from different vendors you have to start supporting, which means you have to put in more effort and more time. And eventually you wind up with somebody on the team whose sole job is just to make sure that the switches, the routers, and all the other network appliances are constantly being updated and checked for configuration. And well, you can take that approach and you can let clients, use whatever they want. But again, you have to at some point add more capabilities, add another body to be able to actually keep up with that, because it is not scalable, it is not efficient. That's why a lot of larger, well, not even really large MSPs, it's just MSPs that have been around a while, that have had the opportunity to mature, or whether they just started out with this as part of their core concept in the beginning. They say, yes, we will support your equipment for 3 months, 6 months, 10 months, 12 months, whatever. But here's our goal and our target to get you switched over to our appliances, to our equipment, so that we can efficiently support it without having to dedicate more time to it than what is necessary. And then with CIS Control 12.3, securely managed network infrastructure, well, it's fairly obvious what it's asking you to do here. So that would be things like monitoring and enforcing the use of secure network protocols. So how would you do that? Use RMM or Essential AD or Intune, take your choice, to monitor if SMB version 1 is enabled in your environments. And then if it is enabled, to disable it. And we have automated task and service monitors and checks inside of the automation cookbook, which, if you don't know what the automation cookbook is it is a resource we have available out on the success.enable website. And if you're looking for the actual link, it is going to be in the handout that's part of the today's session. And in here we have a link for the automation cookbook. And in there you will find the scripts and the tasks you would need to be able to facilitate that. Or, you can also use network security appliances to perform packet inspection to make sure that specific protocols aren't being used in the environment. And again, documenting it, monitoring it, and verifying it are going to be important. And then a little bit more about the CIS controls, because this is it's an important thing for whenever you're kind of trying to build this all up and align it. The CIS controls were made with the concept of most impact with the least resources. And it has easy to follow implementation groups based on the risk profile, as Stefanie was talking about earlier, that you identify your clients to. So you can start aligning these things. So you can say that implementation group 1 is basic cyber hygiene controls, and all MSPs should be implementing all of those controls listed for your clients and internally. And you can align that to say, all right, if we are going to go with that essentials package, then we're going to be using the implementation group 1 controls. And then if we move up to advanced or to up another level, then we're going to go to implementation group 2, which is meant for clients that are a little bit more complex or applying on maybe some enterprise grade technology. And they can tolerate some downtime, but bad PR is something that they're actively concerned about. Their data sensitivity is a little bit higher. Then, well, you're going to move them up a level on the package, and you're going to put in these controls. And then if you have a larger client that's very sensitive, their data is very sensitive. It has to be maintained confidentially and has to be available when it's needed. Downtime is not an option. And attacks for them aren't just bad PR. Significant harm can come from malicious attacks. That's where you're going to be using implementation group 3. You're going to have them on your highest level package, and you may be engaging an MSSP to provide those other services that are kind of, outside of your wheelhouse, outside of the labor resources or the skill sets that you have available. So these can line up very nicely with the packages that Stefanie outlined earlier. So I'm going to go through a few slides now on the actual implementation of some of these controls. So if you go and download the CIS controls, they are freely available. You can register for free with this with CIS and get them. And I've got the link in here available for you, so you can go register and grab them. once you have those controls in front of you, one of the things you have to do is just work through the controls and say, yes, I can do this. How am I going to do it? So we'll just go with CIS control 1. So 1.1 is establish and maintain detailed enterprise asset inventory. It's required of all of the implementation groups. But the great thing is if you're already using RMM or N-central, well, you've got the tool available for this. RMM and N-central's asset discovery information that they gather can be used for this. You can also additionally augment that with other discovery methods. So maybe you're using Nmap to do discoveries on the environment every quarter or so, and you're coalescing that information and keeping it in an ITSM or in your PSA or in your documentation somewhere. And then whenever you discover an unknown asset, well, how do you address that unauthorized asset? Is it something that is supposed to be there, but maybe the client went off and they bought a new laptop and didn't tell you about it? Well, that needs to be added to your list of allowed assets. Or maybe it's something that shouldn't be on the network. Well, do we just uninstall it? Was it there for malicious intent? Do we just need to create a new VLAN or another segmented network for that device to go on? Or we need to rehome it somewhere else? Those types of responses. For control 1.3, utilize an active discovery tool. So this is another thing where it's IG 2 and 3. But again, RMM and N-central are going to be handling that for you because of the asset discovery. It's kind of the same thing as the first one, and you're still going to have the same kind of response. You're going to address unauthorized assets when they're discovered. But whenever we get up to control 1.5, use of a passive asset discovery tool. This is where Enable is not going to have a tool to help you with this part. How would you implement this control? Well, you would need a network-based IDS or IPS system or something of similar nature that can monitor your network traffic. Maybe you're doing this from DNS logs instead. But what you're looking for is the ability to alert and report on new devices discovered on the network. And the difference between this discovery, the passive discovery, and active discovery is the active discovery, RMM and N-central can do a broadcast and ask everybody, hey, everybody report in. But a rogue device or a malicious device may not answer that request. It may say, nope, I'm not going to say anything to you. But that rogue device may have made DNS requests. It may be transmitting data on the network already. That's why something like this would be able to help you to discover it. So if you were going to do pen testing, if you went out and you engaged a pen tester to come in and do external and internal pen testing for you, if you do not have passive discovery tools in your environment, you will not catch what they are doing as far as plugging in a device in your environment. They will be able to avoid detection fairly easily if you're not using passive asset discovery. Then on to CIS control 2. So, you work through all of them in 1, and then you work through all of them in 2 and just fill them all out as you go. So for 2, it's establishing and maintaining a software inventory. How would you implement this? Well, you have the ability for, RMM and N-central can gather asset information about the software installed on endpoints. So that's great. But you'll still need a documentation solution of some sort. You could use Passportal. So you can record the licensed software that's allowed in the environment, the licenses that are supposed to be used, the title, the publishers, the vendor URL, the deployment mechanism. How did you deploy it in the environment? What's the decommission date? So is there a license expiration? Is there an expected end of life coming up for it? Those types of things. And that needs to be updated annually or more frequently. You can also, with this, help yourself out a little bit with some automations. And then you have control 2.4, using automated software inventory tools. Again, RMM and N-central can discover this, and you can take and feed that back into your documentation. And per control 2.3, so whenever you find unauthorized software in the environment, how do you respond to it? So you can use service monitors or daily safety checks inside of RMM and N-central to alert to alert to new software appearing in the environment. Back to the cookbook. We have a service monitor for Essential and a 24/7 check for RMM that will notify you if a piece of software is added or removed from the endpoint, so you can get a heads up and go investigate it, see what it is. We also have some monitors in there that are built to monitor for well-known remote desktop solutions and other RMM solutions, because one of the things that attackers will do is they will use legitimate IT tools to evade AV and other security solutions, because, well, they're a legitimate software, so why would the AV block it? That's where being able to have the, either app control in place to block that, but if you don't have app control, then the next best thing you can do is, well, monitor what is there. And we have service monitors and checks that monitor for some common IT tools like AnyDesk, Atera, Sayas, things like that. But not just a security concern here, that's also a business concern. They can be great early indicators of possible client churn. So if something like Screen Connect or AnyDesk shows up on one of your endpoints you manage, well, you're using Take Control or you're using something else. It's not in your portfolio of tools. Well, it's going to have gotten there, primarily one of three ways. One is a malicious actor that's gained persistence in the environment. Two, an individual end user allowed access or they installed it themselves and it's part of shadow IT and you need to follow up on it. Or third, your client has engaged another IT provider or MSP, and this could be an indicator of early churn. And if you can pick up on that early, I can't guarantee you whether your client will be pleasantly surprised or concerned, but if you call them about 15 minutes after somebody installed a piece of remote access software on one of their computers, again, I can't guarantee it's going to be a good experience, but they will be surprised that you reached out that quickly. And it's worth having that type of capability. Control 2.7, allow list for authorized scripts. So for, if you're using RMM and Essential, this isn't just about your client's environments, it's also the tools that you use. You're going to want to use controls and auditing in RMM and Essential to ensure that only approved technicians can add or modify tasks and scripts. And maybe everybody can run a task, but not everybody can edit a task or add a task. Also using group policy and domains or through Azure AD or Intune to implement script signing restrictions and reassessing this on a biannually or more often period. Of course, no single vendor has everything. So whenever we jump up to the CIS Control 18, penetration testing, and specifically 18.2, perform periodic external penetration tests, well, we don't have anything whatsoever that's going to help you with that as far as a tool or a platform that we can sell you. But you can partner, again, you can partner with an MSSP that offers that capability, or you can go purchase the tool like Nessus, Rapid7, or you can learn to do the pen testing yourself. You could use Kali Linux, Metasploit, Nmap. Kali Linux and Nmap, open source, freely available. All the functionality is there. This is one of the, these are tools that pen testers and security researchers use regularly in the delivery of their services and what they do. So if you want to take on the challenge of learning how to do pen testing, those are the tools you would be using to start to learn it. Now, you can use a paid solution, or you can go out and you can purchase that service from somewhere else. That is going to give you a faster time to, it's going to give you a much faster time to market. It's going to prevent you from maybe having to add more labor hours or hire a new body to be able to achieve it. So there's always the trade-off there. For Control 14, security awareness and skills training. 14.6, train workforce members on recognizing and reporting security incidents. Again, you may partner with an MSSP that offers this kind of training. You may purchase a cybersecurity awareness training program from KnowBe4, Barracuda, Fish Labs, or Proofpoint. Or you can develop your own cybersecurity awareness training program, leveraging the resources from things like the SANS Institute Department of Health and Human Services, DoD Cyber Exchange, the CIS, the CISA. But of course, it's another one of those questions of time to market and the resources that you would have to put into building it. And if you have been exposed to any of these types of trainings in the past couple of years, there's been a very, very strong lean in on gamification of this type of training because, well, training that is done via gamification and done well is very effective versus just having a wall of text telling somebody these are all the things you should be concerned about and monitoring. So to be effective at it and do it yourself, it is not something that you're going to turn around in a week or 2 weeks. It's going to be something you turn around in half a year. So something you may have as a goal on the horizon that you want to shoot for, but if you need something to go today or tomorrow with, you're kind of going to be stuck with purchasing pre-built programs from someone else. And there's nothing wrong with that because, well, a lot of this stuff is going to be constrained by resources, skills, and time restraints. And a lot of the things that we've covered today, and whenever you start getting into those security frameworks, whichever one you decide that you're going to build off of, it may be beyond your current capabilities, and it may be beyond your capabilities of anything you could reasonably do for months or years. So, depending upon your current level of maturity and your available resources, you're probably going to have to reach for a significant amount of outside help. And well, where do you start looking for some of that outside help? One is MSP Alliance. They provide assistance with creations of audits and certification strategies. If you need, if you have the monetary resources to go and buy a helping hand, great place to start. Tech Tribe is another good option. CyberGuard Compliance, they offer pen testing and compliance assistance. If maybe you're comfortable with setting up the controls and establishing all those types of things, but you want a second set of external eyes to come in and verify what you're doing. And then there's MSSPs like Flexus that offer multiple cybersecurity services to MSPs. Their job and their function is not to come in and replace you as an MSP. They don't want to replace you as an MSP. They do not want to do help desk support and replace toner cartridges like you may have to. They want to sell a service to you. You leverage that service, you pay them and not bother them with anything. That's their model. Just like for the most part, your model is to your clients, buy these services that we spend a lot of time standing up and tailoring and get dialed in just right, pay us for them, and hopefully, fingers crossed, everything works well and you don't have to raise support tickets. It's that same kind of relationship. So MSSPs, do not be afraid of them. They can be what helps you get to the next level. So for technical takeaway, things to remember. So take advantage of the security service program outline for a head start that Stefanie went over and what you're going to be able to, what we'll be sending out later. You can start with that tomorrow and not have to think about things too much. It's okay to outsource when you don't have the required skills or tools, whether that's partnering with another MSP or an MSSP. And if this is your first time dealing with standards or frameworks, start small with the CIS controls. You can read through all of the CIS controls in an hour. Whereas with the NIST cybersecurity, you might as well make a cup of coffee and get comfortable because it's going to take you multiple hours to get through all of it. And it's going to take even more time to understand it. Documentation of processes as an operations manual is key though. So when you choose that framework and you start building out everything to it, document it, because like with just about anything else, whenever it comes to MSPs and technicians and engineers and owners, we will gladly go out and we will learn things. We will figure something out. If we've got to sit there and pull out our hair, pound our head against a brick wall, we will figure something out. And we kind of take pride in that. Once you've learned that, that needs to become knowledge of your business, not the knowledge of an individual mind. So as you're working through these things and you're building out these controls. Make sure it's all documented as actionable operations manual where everything is covered. All of these things, they're meant to help you standardize and automate everything possible as much as you can, so it will make it easier for you to scale what you're doing. So staying aware and informed. So we're going to want you to take advantage of existing enabled resources. We have the boot camps that we're doing, like the one we did today. There's the security and other blogs that we have. The cookbook that's full of the monitoring and automation scripts. For the boot camps, there's the ones that I perform. There's the security boot camp and the advanced security boot camps. The security boot camp is great as a security 101 for everybody on your team to attend, regardless of what their role is. Advanced security, well, that's probably still going to be good for any of your major decision makers in your company, as well as just about everybody that's on the technical side, no matter how, what that role might be. And then there's also the office hours that I do once a month. It's done the Thursday after Patch Tuesday, where I will review whatever's been happening, over the last month, anything that's notable, out of band updates, which patches, what vulnerabilities you should prioritize patching based on not just their severity rating, so is it marked as critical important, but also on its temporal sense of it. Well, is this currently under active exploitation, or is it marked as exploitation more likely or exploitation less likely? So I spend about an hour and a half of my time every month processing all of that information from Microsoft and distilling it down to an actionable checklist of vulnerabilities of, these should be your primary concerns for this month. These should be the ones you target first. So it's a great way to have some access to what is happening, what other people are saying, because the office hours are also, they're open. Anybody wants to come in and ask questions, they're more than welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Lewis. And then, from the business end of things, there's some other really good enabled business resources that we encourage you to leverage. So just like Lewis, I run my own series of boot camps. They're focused on the most pressing sales and marketing topics that MSPs are concerned with today. I'm still relatively new into the role, but so far I've done a cold calling one, how to design a cold calling motion within your MSP. Kind of a marketing 101, the things that you need to do to get quality leads from a marketing perspective into your funnel. Last week, I just completed a boot camp called, Selling Doesn't Stop Once the Contract is Signed. So it really focused on account management and making sure that you include a executive business review process as part of your account management material. And then I have new boot camps coming up. Obviously, this one was a new one, and then I have another one next month. And it's taking today's boot camp, but going a little bit more deeper from the business standpoint. It's called Building and Selling Security Programs. So there's always, new training ideas that I'm looking for partners. So if there's something from a sales and marketing perspective that you'd like me to tackle for the new year, definitely would love to get that feedback from you. And along with Lewis, I too write blogs. Hopefully we can connect on LinkedIn. I post them there and direct back to our website. A lot of the times I try to complement what a lot of the other nerds are writing, but kind of taking it from the business standpoint, kind of the with them, the what's in it for me from an MSP standpoint. And like Lewis and the other nerds, I too run office hours on a monthly basis. And the idea, like all the other nerds office hours, submit, your questions, but I take it from a sales, marketing, and program design standpoint. But the other big resource that we have for our partners is our Market Builder. And for those that might have not heard of Market Builder, this is something that we've recently launched earlier this spring at our Empower event. It's our new initiative that's really kind of provides you with ready-made, on-demand campaigns in a box, to kind of help you market and sell your services. And we have a variety of campaigns in there all ready to go, and we have specific campaigns focused on security and managed security. And with the Cybersecurity Awareness Month coming next month, well, actually next week, there's going to be a few new campaigns that the Market Builder team has been working on that they're going to load into the Market Builder system as well. And so we provide, all sorts of white labeled marketing collateral that you can kind of take and quickly brand, put your own logo on it, put your own contact information in it, so that you don't have to spend cycles, creating all of that content on your own. So if you haven't had a chance to check Market Builder out yet, I have the link there on the screen. It's fairly easy just to kind of jot down and go. I encourage you to register, get yourself an email, a login, but maybe you have, a login that you've signed up for, but you haven't ducked into it lately. I absolutely encourage you, especially as if you're going down the path of building out your new programs, you want to start marketing and selling them, take a look at Market Builder and see what we have to kind of help you from that regards. So again, my business call to actions, kind of the business takeaways, to kickstart this process for you, go and segment your customers, segment your prospect base to determine, each customer's overall risk rating. Take that spreadsheet, high, medium, low, so that you can kind of get a really good idea of where you need to direct your efforts from a cybersecurity program design standpoint. And then using Lewis's framework and, kind of our sample security programs framework that we talked about, start, putting your programs together. And then, as I mentioned, I have a new boot camp coming up next month, October the 26th. I'm calling it Building and Selling Security Programs. I have, it's wrong on the slide, I renamed it. So it's called Building and Selling Security Programs. And it's taking initially what I talked about today, outlining the new security programs, but taking it a step further where I go into how to price your programs, leveraging our pricing calculator, making sure that you're getting sufficient margin and you're building in sufficient margin into your programs, and then going into great detail on how to sell those programs to your customers, really focusing on objection handling techniques. I think I've identified 11 possible objections that you will probably likely hear or you probably have heard from your customers, and I provide some responses and ways to address when you see that. So I do have the link there to register for the upcoming boot camp, but if you just go to our events page on the enable.com website, you can easily follow it or find it there, or just ping me on LinkedIn or send me an email and I can send you the link directly as well. But then, then you need to work on determining your sales approach. So work with your existing clients first to improve your share of wallet that they currently have with you. I would start, if this is a daunting task, ranking your customers based on their monthly MRR that they have with you. And those that have the least amount of services with you or have the most gaps in terms of their security coverage, I would use that as a springboard and go book your executive business reviews meetings with them, or maybe call it a cybersecurity review, and explain to them that you need to speak to them about improving their existing security and the protection coverage that they currently have with you. And then for any net new clients, only position your new cybersecurity programs to them. Draw a line in the sand, stick to your guns, don't deviate from that minimum viable program, however you've designed it, because you want to work towards reducing your risk exposure as the MSP, not increase it by continuing to take on risky clients who maybe they don't value your expertise or they don't value your industry knowledge and they don't really value what you're trying to achieve by working with them. But we appreciate everybody's time. This was a lengthy boot camp, and I know you have a lot of priorities and a lot of plates that you're trying to keep in the air, but definitely appreciate you spending part of your day with us. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks, Lewis.
Been a pleasure.